itemize. And the $300 allowable deduction on top of the non-itemizer is expiring at the end of this year. So there's legislation that is called the Universal Giving Pandemic Response and Recovery Act that would try and increase that. But we're trying to raise awareness about that because what we did see is that giving to nonprofits did increase, especially from smaller donors throughout because of the expansion from the CARES Act. So I'll pause there and see if there are any questions.
So now we'll be able to answer one or two questions. We are going to have questions at the end, but want to make sure that if there are any burning questions you have for Chai, you get the chance to ask now. If there are no questions, we are going to go right away with Alana's presentation. I see, will charter schools benefit from these bills, Chai?
Charter schools as 501c3 nonprofits would, yeah, they would be eligible for any of the programs that are available to nonprofits.
Perfect. Any more questions? With that, I am going to pass it to Alana. So Alana, welcome. Thank you for being with us today. And someone took on my note, but Alana, I think I've been seeing you actually in tent in Washington. So I think we all know at this point that immigration is a big issue for many of us and many of our community and our families, for some of us, friends and acquaintances. So today we have Alana to kind of give us what's happening with the immigration, potential immigration policies that are moving through Congress. If there's only one, are there more than one? And are there any expectation we'll see the Congress and the president moving on immigration issues? With that, Alana Cantillo from New York City Immigration Coalition.
Thank you so much. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Fabulous. Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alana Pilar Cantillo. I'm the Vice President of Advocacy here at the NYIC, and I'm going to talk about our Pathway to Citizenship federal campaign that we've been working on here at the New York Immigration Coalition. Just a quick primer, the NYIC is a 30-plus-year-old network of immigrant-led and immigrant-serving nonprofits. We're a membership organization that has membership throughout New York State, and we do advocacy at the federal, state, and local level. Obviously, for the topic of today's discussion, I'm going to be talking about what are some of the activities and some of the asks that we've been pushing at the federal level as it relates to the recent admin changes and the majority changes that we've benefited from here in the States. So I'm presenting some screen, just a quick agenda that I'm going to go over really short. I'm going to talk about how citizenship has been discussed through reconciliation, which is the process by which we can make the type of investments that Buildback Better hopes to achieve, as well as the process by which we've been able to create some stimulus around pandemic response. I'm going to give a recap of some of the activities related to our campaign, and then open it for a few questions at the end. So very quickly, the process of reconciliation is made possible by our simple majority. We have 50 Democratic members in the Senate, with Senator Harris being the tie-breaking vote in order to pass some of these provisions. The way that we do that is that they need to be, they can only be passed as sort of economic investments, as sort of financial stimulus. There is a member of the Senate staff called the Parliamentarian that is consulted to address a bird rule, or just whether the process of reconciliation applies to the policies that folks want to achieve. And another element of reconciliation is that it must be deficit neutral. So as my colleagues have already noted, in the Build Back Better bill and the Build Back Better proposal, which is how reconciliation is expected to be achieved, there are a lot of really important investments, a lot of really important expansions on current, human services programs, that have already been mentioned, including immigration provisions. And so these immigration provisions have been negotiated for some time. Our relevant committee at the federal level is our Judiciary Committee that's chaired by our local Congressman, Jerry Nadler. And back in September, there was an initial proposal that what we like to call Plan A, around expanding green cards to Dreamers, TPS recipients, and essential workers. That is really in recognition of the lack of stability of these short-term programs that DACA recipients and TPS holders have with, sometimes 1 to 2 year renewals, a lot of uncertainty with regards to Supreme Court decisions. And so back in September, the Parliamentarian released a 4-page memo rejecting the ability for legalization and a pathway to citizenship for these groups through Parliamentarian. Ultimately, this was passed in the Senate and it was passed in the House, understanding that this was just at the committee level. There would be many more months and weeks where these elements will be negotiated. And then later on that month, a couple weeks later, we received another ruling or recommendation from the Parliamentarian on what we like to call Plan B. And Plan B was adjusting the registry date for undocumented immigrants here in the United States from its current date of 1972 to January 1st, 2010. And that would capture around 8 million out of a total 11 million undocumented folks. And it serves sort of like as a statute of limitations. Sort of there's no look back. There's an acknowledgement that people are settled here, that they've been here for a certain amount of time. And as mentioned here, the Parliamentarian came back and said that also rejected that proposal. And ultimately what was passed in Buildback Better in 2019 and on November 19th of 2021 is as follows. What we saw in the final package of 1.75 trillion was 100 billion for immigration parole. And what parole is a temporary status that offers work permits, protection from deportation, and the potential to travel to one's home country with special permissions. And the impact of who we think would be eligible is around 7 million individuals. And then on average, these individuals would have been here for around have to be here at least 10 years, but really the average is closer to 20. And the impact locally is over 400,000 New Yorkers here in the state. And while this is sort of where we are and what's currently included in the BBB bill language, our campaign currently is still with green cards and a pathway to citizenship. So our current ask is to ignore the Parliamentarian. I want to stress that the Parliamentarian is an unelected person who works at the desire of the Senate. And so we have longstanding precedent where, Democrats, where Republicans have fired parliamentarians when they didn't agree with their decision. And so our current campaign is requesting that President Biden and Vice President Harris, as the Senate's presiding officer, ignore the Parliamentarian. And you might have seen some of this information on social media and some of this messaging that exists, because right now we, as NYC, do not think that parole is an acceptable option. We've spent the first half of the year gaining a lot of momentum for pathway to citizenship, for permanent protections, not protections that would last for 5 years out of our time and would only be extended once for a total of 10 years. We know that really doesn't capture or satisfy the populations that we have here in New York State. And so right now we are still fighting for green cards and a pathway to citizenship, which the Vice President is able to propose at the Senate level as the presiding officer. And if, say, a Republican were to object to her disregard of the Parliamentarian's advice or recommendation, that ultimately that would require a 60 vote of senators to override, which we think is really feasible, but just, in all reality, it is an uphill battle, because, we understand that the parliamentarian does have this role, and a lot of people have a lot of deference to her. But we know that we've gotten so much support of the White House, of our Senate Majority Leader, Senator Schumer here in New York State, and so many members of Congress across the country that we really want to push for this to happen. So here are some of the tactics that we've engaged in on our campaign. We've done occupations outside Senator's home. We've done banner drops all over the state. We've done bridge takes over, mass mobilization, vigils. And this only hasn't been a mobilization tactic. There have been a lot of communication strategies. Here are some of the highlights from some of the work that we've done with our members, NICE and ADICAR, and so many other groups, Cabrini Immigrant Services of New York City featured here. And here are some of the communication tactics, statements we've gotten support, ads that we've put out, mobile billboards, and a number of tactics. I'm happy to share the slides with folks to follow so that you can check out some of these ads, as really they're some of the most effective tactics that we have at our disposal. And we've gotten ads that we've placed here in New York, in Senator Schumer's home state, but also in DC. And as people have mentioned, right now we're awaiting a response from the Parliamentarian on parole itself. Obviously, as a movement, as an immigrant rights movement, her response has really been unsatisfactory and something that we think can just be disregarded at this point. But we are continuing to push for Schumer, who is still hopeful that this vote is going to happen this year. But some of the important players in his conference, like Senator Manchin has been mentioned, note that that is doubtful. I just want to stress that really this is our last chance going into an election cycle to really make some of these changes accessible. And so I have a link here for folks to contact Senator Schumer to continue to fight for permanent protections and not only work permits for our immigrant neighbors, our immigrant business owners, in an effort to recognize their important contributions, how we've been deemed essential, how we've been the majority of the essential workforce. And so I'll be able to share that with folks after this. So once again, thanks so much, and happy to take a few questions.
Thank you, Alana. You just gave us a lot of work to do and for us to follow. I am certainly following all of the work you guys are doing. Here in the city, I know the Immigration Coalition and many of the organizations working on immigration just had a big win with our vote, our city. So there's I know, personally that your organization and many others are doing a lot of work to benefit immigrants and make sure that they can participate fully as much as possible in our society. So thank you so much for that. Are there any questions for Alana at this point? So before we pass it to Carolina. Alana just dropped the link so that you can take actions by signing on letters and following how you can get involved. Any questions? I don't know that I can see the questions here in my chat. All right, so our next presenter is Carolina Rodriguez from the Community Service Society. So Carolina.
Yeah, so I think one of the questions that people really want to know is around debt cancellation. I think nowadays we see newspaper articles talking about the 1.7 trillion debt crisis that we have, and I can attest as someone who does direct consumer assistance, it is a crisis. I think we all know someone who's impacted by this debt. And it is impacting everyone across socioeconomic statuses, but obviously lower income first generation college students are bearing the brunt of it. So when it comes to student loan debt cancellation at the federal level, we want to keep two things in mind. There are definitely senators and congressional representatives like Senator Warren, Schumer, pushing for cancellation. And there have been some bills introduced, but realistically, I don't think we have the agreement to pass a bill where it's going to cancel student loan debt. So far, advocates have really been pushing for this to be done through executive action. And I know that throughout the last few months, there has been this push to say to Biden, you can go ahead and do this. It is within your authority. Advocates still wholeheartedly believe that Biden can do it. There was supposed to be a memo confirming this. That memo has not been seen the date of light. But again, there is this implied understanding that Biden could cancel student loan debt within a stroke of a pen. Then the question turns to like, what amount would cancellation involve? There's been the 10,000 and there's been the 50,000, right? I can tell you that in the foreseeable future, that is not happening. When I say foreseeable future, for sure, we're not going to see it prior to payments resuming for federal student loans come February 1st. So one of the things that we do as part of my program is we're doing a lot of workshops and really informing borrowers, how do you prepare, right? Like, what do you do to prepare for payment resumptions to make sure that they have a strategy? Because it is happening. The current administration has indicated that they are moving forward and that payments are going to resume, interest rates are going to be back up and running, and so forth. Now, when it comes to the nonprofit world, we have really good news. And one of the things this administration is doing is they're really trying to fix a lot of the programs in place that are supposed to help borrowers. And one of the biggest reforms that it's temporary, but they have done is around the public service loan forgiveness program. And the public service loan forgiveness program is available to anyone who works in the government nonprofit 501c3, meaning all of you and your employees, which basically says after making 120 qualifying payments, 10 years equivalent, any remaining balance is forgiven, and that forgiven amount is not taxable. So for a lot of our clients, that is probably the best program that they can pursue. The challenge has been that only about 2% of people who have applied have been accepted, meaning they've obtained relief. So under the latest initiative by the current administration, they're relaxing a lot of the key program requirements. They are basically saying, if you've worked for a qualifying employer and made payments equivalent to 120, you can get credit. Or if you've made payments but have not reached 120, we'll give you credit as long as you can show that you've made a payment and you're working for a qualifying employer. It doesn't matter if your payment was late, it doesn't matter the type of loans you had, and it doesn't matter the type of repayment plan. The key takeaway for all of you is to make sure that you help us disseminate this information, because some people will need to take action and the deadline is October 31st, 2022. So we have a little bit less than a year to make sure that all New Yorkers who may possibly benefit from the PSLF waiver relief actually take advantage of it. We've already seen borrowers obtain forgiveness, so there's a lot of hope, and this is a big piece. Now, what are the next steps? How do we make this a priority, whether it's cancellation or additional reform? I really encourage your organizations to be active, similar to other areas like immigration. It is until we raise our voices and we say this is an issue that requires being prioritized that we're going to see action, right? To eliminate the entire student loan debt portfolio would require 1.7 trillion. Just for context, the infrastructure bill was 1.2, the Buildback Better is 1.7. So again, it's going to take a lot of work if we were to seek across the board forgiveness, unlikely with the current climate in DC, but there are clearly things that can be done to support those who are carrying the weight of student loan debt.
Right, thank you, Carolina. Before we go to questions, just gonna do a personal. So I have Carolina next door, and I've been working in public service for, I'm not gonna say, but enough to qualify for the credit. So sometime in the summer, the fall, I was able to get my loan forgiven through the public service forgiveness program. I obviously was one of the lucky people that know how to do my research, and I was able to set up my loans in a way that most of my payments were counted. But at the end, I also had problems. So Carolina helped me out, put together like a 25 pages package to get my application in and making sure that many of those payments were counted and were credited for. So I wanted to thank Carolina publicly for helping me out with that. and encouraging all of you. If you're not sure, just contact ECAP, and she, Carolina and her colleagues will be able to at least review where you are and maybe what you can do. One thing that people don't realize is that the 2 years of the moratorium, those payments, those non-payments, because many of us were not paying through the pandemic, that's about 24 months of time of credit you can get that you were not paying, but you still are able to get those credits. So I think people don't realize that if you already have been paying for about 8 years, another 2 years of the moratorium, that will count toward your public service forgiveness application. So hurry up and put your application in before October 22nd. Any questions for Carolina around student loans before we move on to our next step?
And I should say, Santa, if you allow me, I just dropped in our contact information in the chat, and I'll drop in my email address. If any of you want EdCap to do a presentation for your own organization, we do that all the time, and we can focus it on public service loan forgiveness. And our presentations are like really good because they're more like workshops. We will provide you an in-depth presentation about public service loan forgiveness or any other related topic. So feel free to take advantage, and all of our services are obviously free.
All right, so I am going to go back to ask the panelists if there are any questions for the panelists. But before we go to do that, I want to cover 2 other areas. One is just want to say that the Community Service Society, the organization Carolina and I work for, 2 other issues that we are advocating along with other advocates in New York City is funding for Nysha, particularly for Nysha capital needs. As you know, we are expecting some money, I think, in the infrastructure bill as well as in the Buildback Better bill as well, that could help public housing. So that's something that we are working really hard along also with our Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez and Congressman Senator Schumer. I know Congressmember Richie Torres. So we have a lot of advocates here in the city for Nysha, and we are really I think pushing hard and making our voices heard that we need funding to cover Nysha's capital needs, as well as the Community Service Society also has been working with advocates throughout actually the nation on trying to fund again consumer assistance programs under the Affordable Care Act. So when the Affordable Care Act was actually signed into law, he had a portion that allocated funding for each state to have a consumer assistance program that is served to provide assistance to people with insurance. So that way, if they had any issues with their insurance or they had any issues with hospitals, that they had like a neutral advocate to work with them. So that funding actually went away years ago. Some of the state, like New York State, it has been covering some of those fundings. But this year we're asking the Congress to reallocate funding for consumer assistance programs under the Affordable Care Act. And with that, the next I would like to move to some announcement from some of our fellow advocates in the city who are following other parts of the federal advocacy. So first we'll have Lena Belek. She works with Children's Aid Society, and she's gonna be doing some announcement around community school. Lena.
Hi, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. Just real quickly, wanted to share an update on community schools. As a lot of folks know, New York City has the biggest initiative in the country of community schools. And so just wanted to update some things happening. There's a lot of political interest, a lot of momentum around community schools right now nationally. Started with the Biden administration's budget proposal that increased investments in the federal full service community schools funding by 1,200%. So really big increase that the president is proposing. And then we saw Congress respond with the same or close to the same amount of increase for that federal funding for community schools. So of course, these are not at all final. We're also hearing it may be a harder push than we originally thought. But as mentioned earlier in this call, appropriations did not reach agreement on many spending bills for this year. So they passed that continuing resolution, pushing it into next year. So the good news there is there's still some time if you're so inclined to advocate to your federal representatives around community schools. And I'm going to drop in the chat in a minute just a take action link to send a letter to your lawmakers and really urge them to include that increase that would bring it to $443 million for full service community schools in the appropriations bill. And then just real quickly, there's also been huge increases in federal funding from the stimulus for education going to states. And part of that did have community schools as an allowable expense. New York State directed that money to districts, and we did see some good news locally. New York City is going to be investing that money into expanding the city's portfolio of community schools from 266 schools to 406 this coming year. So keep an eye out for information from the city about that as well. And I'll just drop a take action link for that federal piece in the chat. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Lena, for that on community schools. As we all know, community schools are very important because it really provides a lot of wraparound services and activities to many of our children in public school, including my 12-year-old who is in a community school. So I do appreciate all of the activities that he gets and information we get with the nonprofit organization that work with our particular school. So thank you, Lena, for that. The next announcement is going to be covered by Erin Hood. Erin?
Hi, everyone. My name is Erin Hood. Thanks so much for having me. I'm the Good Shepherd volunteer working at the National Advocacy Center of the Sisters of the Good Shepherd in Washington, D.C. The National Advocacy Center, also known as NAC, was founded 20 years ago to be the advocacy branch of the Congregation of Our Lady of the Good Shepherd. We advocate at the federal level for the concerns of Good Shepherd agencies around the country and for their clients in pursuit of social justice for all. Our three priority areas are poverty, human trafficking, and immigration. And we conduct our advocacy through a variety of ways, including action alerts, email blasts to Congress, conferences, sign-on letters. We lobby members of Congress. We join advocacy coalitions to strengthen our fight for social justice. We issue statements and quotes, and we use social media. And so over the past few months, NAC has been particularly focused on passing the Buildback Better Act, which is currently waiting for a vote in the Senate, hopefully before Christmas. The Buildback Better Act is extremely important for our advocacy priorities and for the clients at Good Shepherd agencies across the country. It's going to do so much for families and for people in poverty. Just as a couple examples, expanding and extending the child tax credit and creating paid family leave and helping affordable housing. Other legislative matters that we work on include the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act, the Justice and Policing Act, and ending Title 42, which enables the government to expel asylum seekers at the border en masse. I wanted to thank you all for joining us over Zoom today, and I'm going to drop a link in the chat so you can sign up to receive action alerts from NAC over email, because whenever there's a really critical issue happening in DC, we like to send out alerts that make it incredibly easy for you to contact your representative and make your voice heard. So I highly encourage everyone to take a second to sign up for our mailing list at the link that I'm about to drop in the chat. And yes, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Erin, and thank you, Lena, as well. For right now, we are ready for questions or comments. If people have, if you want to raise your hand, but you can unmute yours. I think everyone is able to unmute themselves, right, Erin? If they need to?
Yes.
Okay, so you are able to unmute yourself if you want to ask or just, share a comment that you may have.
And I also believe there was a question that was asked a little up in the chat for Alana.
Yes, for Alana, right? Yeah, I missed that. Thank you, Erin. Go ahead, Alana.
Thank you. So Jessica from FPWA said, you mentioned sidestepping the parliamentarian taking 60 votes, but that could be feasible. Can you tell us more about what those additional 9 votes, presuming Manchin and Sinema vote in line, might come from? So it actually takes 60 members to override VP Harris's ignoring the parl. So that means all of the Republicans then would need to recruit an additional 10 Democrats to overrule her assessment that we can in fact include green cards and a pathway to citizenship in the reconciliation bill. And so sorry if I misspoke, but it doesn't take 60 people to override the parliamentarian. The vice president already has the authority to do that. It would take 60 votes to undermine her assessment of that recommendation.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Thank you. And Alana, you want to cover a little bit of what is it possible to understand a little bit of what the parliamentarian process is? Is that something you can share with us today?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, this is an unelected staff member that serves at the request of the Senate. And so they're there in an advisory role to counsel the process, but none of the recommendations or the assessments that she makes through a informal process called, a bird bath, are binding. And ultimately, what we're noting is that, the Democrats are ultimately accountable to the constituents that elected them, to the electorate that put them in those positions of power. And if we don't seize the opportunity with a Democrat in the White House, a Democratic Senate Majority Leader, and a Democrat leader of the House of Republicans, that we're really doing a disservice to the people that elected those leaders into office, and that this is really an opportunity to seize this power and to ultimately deliver for our communities.
Thank you. Shai, are you still with us? Just wanted to check if you have any last comments before we move on to closing.
I'm here. I messed up my Zoom somehow, so I can barely see everybody. I don't know where it went, but I'm here. I just want to lift up some of the resources I dropped in the chat. There's ways to take action if you want to support, particularly the charitable deduction efforts.
Perfect. Thank you. Carolina, any last comments before we move on closing?
Yeah, no, I'm just going to echo, please take advantage of our services and resources, get them to your employees. If you don't have student loan debt, I guarantee you know someone. So now is the time to really start developing a strategy, and short or long term or both is the key to making sure that people see an end to their student debt, because it will follow you till your grave if you don't do something about it. Thank you for the opportunity to be here as well.
Thank you, Carolina. Let me see. I see in the chat. Let me just put. Please share the student loan debt contact information. So Carolina, maybe if you can reshare your information, but I think I've
yes.
Perfect. So with that, I want to just remind everyone in the chat, we share a lot of information, some take action on immigration, take action for nonprofit, and take action on a student loan. So lots of information as well as community schools and some of the initiatives that Erin mentioned. I want to thank everyone all of the panelists, Carolina Rodriguez from Community Service Society, Alana Cantillo from New York City Immigration Coalition, and Shai Jundasara from Nonprofit New York, as well as our host, Annie Minguez again, and Good Shepherds, who actually were hosting this along with the with CSS and Nonprofit New York. I also want to thank all of you who took the 1 hour to be here with us, listening to all of this information that you probably already heard through the news, but we want to make sure that we were focusing on a few pieces that are really important to us as nonprofit, but also to our clients, friends, and colleagues out there. So we want to make sure. So thank you, everyone. And with that, I thank everyone for coming, and have a great afternoon and happy holidays. Thank you.